Who is more American, the guy who supports free and fair elections, me, or the guy who got mad when judges locked up violent insurrectionists who tried to overturn the 2020 election, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the First Amendment and free speech, me, or the guy who wants to imprison people and deport people for their speech, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the United States, me, or the guy who wore a t-shirt celebrating the violent traitors of the Confederacy, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports religious pluralism and separation of church and state as intended by the founders, me, or the guy who wants Christian nationalism in America and proudly calls himself a theocratic fascist, Matt Walsh?
In today's video, Mehdi Hasan destroys Matt Walsh on Zeteo after Walsh unleashes yet another racist, historically illiterate rant about Muslims, immigrants, and American identity. Mehdi doesn't just clap back, he detonates Walsh's entire narrative with actual history, reminding him that many enslaved Africans were Muslim and that Muslim Americans have been part of this country from the very beginning. While Walsh leans on outrage, ignorance, and MAGA talking points, Mehdi hits him with facts, receipts, and the kind of moral clarity Walsh can't spin his way out of. So let's dive in and watch how Mehdi Hasan shuts down Matt Walsh on Zeo.
We need to talk about Matt Walsh. And if you're asking Matt who, then I'm truly envious of you. Normally I wouldn't waste time responding to basically an internet troll, but Matt is so emblematic of everything that is wrong with the modern MAGA right: faux outrage, self-victimization, verbal abuse, a walking, talking Dunning-Kruger. Now, Matt Walsh, who says he's a conservative Christian, is upset with me for being a Muslim and for being an immigrant, but above all else, for being an American. That he cannot stand. So he did an entire 13-minute video calling me a spiteful, lying, self-entitled brat, on top of his tweet in which he called me an ungrateful little bitch, just as Jesus would have said. Now, before we get into the substance of Matt's claims, if we can even call it that, before we get into what I said about Muslims and the founding of America, a little bit of background on who Matt Walsh is. Shock jock podcaster, former radio DJ, and now basically that Daily Wire guy who isn't Ben Shapiro. He's also the guy who hasn't got the greatest of political judgment. He went all in on Ron DeSantis in the GOP primary and then had to come crawling back to Trump when DeSantis got destroyed, as some of us predicted he would. Matt is also the guy who said COVID wasn't a big deal, that, quote, it's totally irrational to panic over this virus. He later admitted he got it wrong. But here's my favorite. Matt was so bothered by a black woman playing Ariel in the Little Mermaid movie that he actually said this.
From a scientific perspective, okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean.
There are no words to describe how dumb you have to be to try and make scientific arguments about the skin color of mermaids, which are fictional fucking characters, Matt. This is the guy who millions on the right turn to for intellectual guidance, historical analysis, and thought leadership. Then you wonder why this country is so screwed right now. By the way, just quickly, consistency isn't really his thing either. In May of this year, he said identifying as a girl dad is super cringe and corny. In 2020, though, he said being a girl dad is a great blessing. He constantly complains about political violence and death threats when they're aimed at him, but he's happy to dish it out to the people he doesn't like. He's called for the mayor of Chicago, a black man, to be executed. He's called for Jimmy Kimmel, a comedian, to be arrested. He once said this, too.
But it is in fact true that you have to make people hurt. And I'm sorry, but holding signs and yelling loudly will not make anyone hurt.
You have to make people hurt. Now, what's really bothering him about me is that I said in a recent visit to Dearborn,
I think that if you can play church bells, you can pray the call to prayer.
Isn't it okay for Muslim Americans to broadcast a call to prayer? I mean, let me add right now, within reason, of course, and in accordance with all local sound and noise ordinances. But Matt went nuts and said Christianity built this country. Islam did not at all in even the slightest way. That's why we can have our church bells. To which I responded, 1 in 3 of the slaves who built this country were Muslims. They were here long before the Walsh family arrived. You'd know that if you'd studied history, but I know MAGA has an issue with studying. To which Matt responded with a 13-minute video in which he got really mad, but was unable to rebut the 2 central points that I made. Number 1, enslaved people helped build this country. And number 2, perhaps up to 1 in 3 of those slaves were Muslims.
Look, anytime Matt Walsh decides to pick a fight with someone smarter than him, it ends exactly the way you'd expect, with Matt tripping over history, facts and reality like they're foreign concepts. And honestly, what Mehdi is pushing back against isn't just Walsh's ranting, it's a whole ecosystem of right-wing influencers who build their entire identity on outrage, insecurity, and a complete allergy to factual history. Because here's the thing, when Matt insists Islam had nothing to do with America, he's not just wrong, he's erasing entire chapters of documented US history. We know that Muslim Africans were among the earliest enslaved people forced into America, not maybe, not possibly, documented. Scholars like Sylvian Diouf and Alan Austin have written extensively on Islamic spiritual practices preserved through slavery. Omar Ibn Said literally wrote his autobiography in Arabic right here in the United States. That's not fringe history, that's Smithsonian-level, peer-reviewed, federal recognized fact. And if Matt wants to talk about who built the country, maybe he should look at the names carved into American infrastructure. Enslaved Africans constructed the White House, the US Capitol, major ports, cotton empires, rail systems, the economic backbone that powered America into global dominance. To pretend that these people didn't exist, didn't contribute, or didn't belong because they weren't Christian is not patriotism, it's propaganda. And the irony, Matt likes to posture as a defender of Western civilization, yet he somehow missed that Western scientific thought itself borrowed heavily from Muslim scholars. Algebra, early medicine, navigational tools that European explorers used to even reach the Americas. So yeah, Mehdi pushing back isn't just a clapback, it's a correction, a badly needed one. Because if people like Walsh had their way, American history would be reduced to a fantasy novel written by people too insecure to accept the multicultural reality of this country.
Matt can't rebut that because it's true, according to historians, according to the African American History Museum, according to the US State Department. Muslim slaves are a historical fact. As his boss Ben Shapiro has famously declaimed, facts don't care about your feelings, Matt. It's not my fault if they didn't teach you about slavery in high school. In his video, Matt Walsh sounds like a Monty Python sketch. What did the slaves ever do for us? Ignoring the railways, the roads, the ports, the literal seat of our government, the White House and the Capitol, all built by enslaved people. And 1 in 3 of them, remember, being Muslims, black African Muslims. Matt is also just completely clueless about the Muslims who fought in the Revolutionary War, in the War of 1812, in the Civil War, where most of them fought in the Union Army. But then again, Matt's been pictured wearing a Confederate t-shirt, so maybe he's mad that the Muslims fought against the Confederacy. He even issues this challenge to me.
If Islam had ceased to exist 300 years ago, this country would not have lost a single thing. There is not a single good thing about our country that we would not have if not for Islam. And if you doubt that, then go ahead and give me an example of the great gift that Islam has given to this country since its founding.
Has he never heard of the Golden Age of Islam, which helped fuel the Renaissance and the Enlightenment in Europe, which of course then helped produce the American founding fathers? Has he ever gotten off of the internet and read a book? But look, I'm happy to fill the gaps in his education. He asked me to explain what Islam or Muslims have done for America. I mean, the black Muslim slaves aside, more recently, how about the planning of the moon landings? That was a Muslim American scientist and immigrant. How about the science behind modern skyscrapers? That was a Muslim American engineer and immigrant. How about brain tumor treatment? That was a Muslim American neurosurgeon and immigrant. Just this year, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to, among others, a Palestinian American Muslim immigrant whose research Matt could never possibly understand and whose work could help tackle man-made climate change, which Matt doesn't believe in.
What makes Matt Walsh's meltdown so revealing is that it exposes just how shallow his understanding of American history really is. The moment you bring up anything outside the narrow, sanitized version of America he's created in his head, he short circuits. And honestly, that's the real issue here. Matt isn't debating facts, he's defending a fantasy. Because if he actually cracked open a history book, he'd know that Muslim presence in America didn't begin with Dearborn or post 9/11 immigration. It began centuries earlier. Enslaved West Africans brought highly developed written languages, agricultural knowledge, metallurgy, mathematics, and statecraft from regions like Senegambia and the Sahel, cultures where Islam had been established for centuries. Scholars like Dr. Michael Gomez and Dr. Rudolph Ware have documented how Muslim captives preserved literacy, astronomy traditions, and agricultural expertise that shaped early American plantations, rice cultivation in the Carolinas. That knowledge was African, and many of those experts were Muslims. And beyond slavery, Matt's claim that Islam contributed nothing falls apart the moment you look at American scientific and intellectual development. The Founding Fathers extensively cited Enlightenment thinkers, Locke, Voltaire, Montesquieu, whose own ideas were shaped by earlier Islamic philosophers like Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Ibn Sina, Avicenna. Thomas Jefferson even owned a Quran and referenced Islamic governance models in discussions about religious freedom. Fast forward to modern America, and Muslims have helped build everything from our medical advancements to counterterrorism intelligence to military service. Thousands of Muslim Americans have served in every major US war, including roughly 15,000 currently in the armed forces. But you won't hear that from Matt because it breaks the narrative he relies on, and that's the funny thing. Mehdi doesn't even need to destroy Matt. History already did. Matt just never bothered reading it.
Because Matt Walsh's knowledge of science is right up there with his knowledge of history. So what does he do? The guy who can't rebut basic facts. He attacks me. He goes after me for a speech I gave nearly 2 decades ago, which I said awful, dumb, bigoted things about the gay community, about non-Muslims, which I've regretted, disowned, apologized for multiple times over the decades. He thinks it's a gotcha. But here's the problem for Matt. What I said back then are essentially Matt Walsh's views right now. Matt is an anti-gay bigot today. In fact, Matt supports a Uganda law imprisoning gay people. I don't. Matt thinks most pop music is satanic. I don't. What I stupidly said nearly 20 years ago in my 20s, Matt basically says today, aged almost 40. Oh, and if you're going to play the game of what were you saying in embarrassing videos decades ago, here's what Matt Walsh was saying in 2010.
But to all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile.
That's pretty gross, pretty disgusting. I think we can all agree. And also kind of creepy. A 25-year-old man telling his audience how fertile 17-year-old girls are? What is wrong with you, man? I mean, it's also ironic that the right are obsessed with smearing Muslims as child molesters and saying Islam supports child marriage, and yet here is Matt on tape saying that about 17-year-old girls, about children. So, look, to conclude, who is more American? The guy who supports free and fair elections, me, or the guy who got mad when judges locked up violent insurrectionists who tried to overturn the 2020 election, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the First Amendment and free speech, me, or the guy who wants to imprison people and deport people for their speech, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports the United States, me, or the guy who wore a t-shirt celebrating the violent traitors of the Confederacy, Matt Walsh? Who is more American, the guy who supports religious pluralism and separation of church and state as intended by the founders, me, or the guy who wants Christian nationalism in America and proudly calls himself a theocratic fascist, Matt Walsh? Yeah, I think I've made the case that I'm much more of an American and much more of a patriotic American than you are, Matt. And you're just going to have to go whine and cry about it.
Honestly, watching Mehdi dismantle Matt Walsh's whole worldview is like watching someone finally open a window in a room that's been sealed shut for 200 years. Because the second you step outside Matt's bubble, the actual record of Muslim contributions to America and the world completely blows up his narrative. And let's be real, if Matt genuinely believed what he says about Islam having no influence, he'd have to throw out half the things he relies on daily. Modern algebra that came from scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, the entire concept of the scientific method popularized by Ibn al-Haytham centuries before Europe caught on. Even the hospital system as we know it traces back to Islamic civilizations, where public free access hospitals existed 1,000 years before America was even imagined. But Matt's too busy cosplaying as a historian to actually read one. And on the American side of things, Muslim soldiers didn't just exist in our military. Many earned medals, honors, and commendations. During World War II, over 15,000 Muslim Americans served, including decorated heroes like Captain Humayun Khan. Today, Muslim Americans serve in intelligence, engineering, medicine, and national security at levels wildly out of proportion to their population size. These aren't fringe footnotes, they're central to how the country actually works. Meanwhile, Matt's pretending to be the arbiter of real America, while platforming ideas completely opposite of what the founders believed. Jefferson owned a Quran, for crying out loud. Franklin openly admired the governance traditions of the Ottoman Empire. Religious pluralism wasn't some side issue, it was foundational. So the irony here is thick. The guy yelling about who counts as an American is the one least aligned with actual American values. Mehdi doesn't even have to swing hard. History's already done the punching for him. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.